All right, good afternoon. I'm Aaron Heiser, Maker's Leather Supply, and this video we're going to talk about making a belt. Everything from the measuring to how I construct a belt. I realize that just like anything else in leathercraft, there's 10 million ways to skin this cat, and everybody does it different. Some people argue to the death that their way is the way, but I'm a firm believer that every leather crafter learns a little bit from somebody and a little bit from somebody else, and then they find their own way somewhere in the middle. So anyway, this is how I build a belt. So what we're going to do, because I already have a belt pretty much ready to sew together over here that we've built over some other videos. You may recognize it from some other videos. But anyway, so what we're going to do is basically build a miniature belt using some measurements and stuff that we're going to learn how to take here. And yeah, and it'll just be kind of a sample piece. I've got some new stuff I need to tool and stain and everything, and it'll be a sample piece for quite a bit of different stuff here. So I'm going to bring the camera down some because you don't need to see my face. You need to see my workbench. So the things we're going to use in this video as far as tools and things like that, let's see if I can get these lights a little better. Tools and things like that. I have a 1.5 inch strap-in punch. I like the round ones, but I also have a set of the English point. I just prefer the round for my own personal preferences. This is an 1.5 inch oblong punch. This is one of our templates. This is the belt-in templates, and it basically just helps you keep your holes centered, and then all your placement for your buckle end as well. I've got a big heavy maul here. We're going to talk about this sucker right here in just a second, and then I've got a stylus to mark it all, and we may need some wing dividers, so always keep them handy. Anyway, the most important thing about belt making is about the measurements. A lot of people have a lot of trouble with the measurements, getting things measured out right and everything. And it's really important. I mean, if somebody's paying for a custom belt, they don't want it to not fit right, or maybe even not fit at all. They definitely don't want that. So we have a problem, though, in our area of the world, the leathercraft industry. People will call us and be like, oh, I wear a size 36. Yeah, okay. I don't listen to pant sizes. I don't care about your pant size. I want to know how big of a belt we need to make. A lot of the time, the easiest way is to have them measure their current belt. The one that they use every single day. It's going to have a notch in it that's very well worn because that's the notch that they use on a daily basis. And I tell folks to get a tape measure and measure their belt from the fold over of the buckle to where that notch is. Okay, so let me just take my belt off here and we'll talk about that. All right, so here's my belt. And when I say the fold over of the buckle, where the belt literally folds, I've got this thing down too far, where it folds over the buckle here, all the way over here to, you can see where my favorite notches are. Okay, I've got actually 2 of them. Apparently I have a winter and a summer notch. The summer notch looks a little tighter. So anyway, this belt fits me really well, and I do have to allocate an extra, say, 1.5 inches or so because I carry a holster at all times. So yeah, and that's probably honestly what the other notch is when I'm not wearing a holster, the belt is a little bit tighter, or pulled a little bit tighter. But some other things we have to take into account. You see that big old V shape? You see that nastiness of my sweat? And I mean, this belt's old. This thing, I've been wearing this one for years. But anyway, see that V shape right there? It's almost like a horse halter or a breast collar, I think they call that on a horse. But anyway, yeah, that's from me being a fat guy, and when I sit up, then the back of my pants pulls down on the middle of that belt right there. Okay, and when I'm measuring to replace this belt, I have to take that into account, and I need to stretch this belt as straight as I can to make my measurements. So yeah, The easiest way, if you can get a hold of your customer's belt or your whoever it is that you're making a belt for, is just to take their belt and put it up against the tape measure, and then just run that sucker all the way down to wherever that favorite notch is. Okay. When I am making a new belt and I have a client's belt there, I will go ahead and create the buckle end and the fold over and everything, and then I'll hold that on their belt. I'll just put them up right beside each other, and I'll run my hands down just like this, pulling them along each other, and that helps to account for that big notch in the back of it when there is one. Okay. Another thing you have to look out for is the thickness of the belt. If they bring you a little 6-ounce thick, cheaply bought or cheaply made store-bought belt, and you're going to make them a really nice, 12-ounce or so, heavy duty, made to last belt, you need to take that into account, because when you wrap that around a person, that heavy 12-ounce belt is not going to go as far around as the thinner 6-ounce belt. So you have to take that into account. And oftentimes I'll add an inch and a half to the length of the belt. I'm going to pause this. My door just opened. All right. Sorry about that. The girls came back in from taking all the shipment out to UPS today. Anyway, I don't really remember where I was from the distraction, but I'm pretty sure I was talking about pulling the belts through my hands to measure. Anyway, one of the best things you can do as a custom leather worker, though, is to make what I like to call the measuring belt. Okay, you should make your measuring belt the same thickness and style, design, and everything as you normally make a belt, which this one is not. I will fully admit my belt is quite outdated, because normally my belts are about 12 ounces in thickness, and this one's only about 9. But anyway, you should make it the same thickness as the belts that you normally make. And you bring it out here and you start just punching holes in it every 3/4 of an inch, all the way down. Okay, pretty big belt. And you need to make it big enough that it'll fit most customers that would walk through the door. Okay. And then you go back with a set of number stamps or letter stamps or a Sharpie marker, whatever, and you number all of your holes. Okay. A word to the wise: if you want to avoid, problems, I don't know how to describe it, but on your measuring belt, these numbers shouldn't mean anything about an actual measurement. Like that, I don't know how far it is from here to hole number 1. Okay, these are just numbered holes. I have 1 through 52. Okay, most people fall somewhere in the mid-30s range or so. And I have people all the time when I'm like, okay, you're a 37, and I write that number down on their order form, and they're like, oh my God, no, I'm a 31. Like, no, it has nothing to do with inches of your waist or size of your pants. It's just the number on my belt that you are. If you put it down as a measurement, then people will argue to the death that, they're not that many inches or whatever. And I mean, I get it. I'm a big guy, and I would probably be like, no, I swear I'm smaller than that. So anyway, that's the story of the measuring belt, and that's why I made mine the way that I did. And it does. It makes it a lot easier, and I explain it to customers before they even put it on. Your number means nothing to you. It only means something to me. And then when you go to make their belt, it's easy peasy lemon squeezy, because you're going to make your belt exactly like the measuring belt is. And when you have, say they're a number 26, when you make your belt for them, then the middle hole of the 5 or 6 holes, whatever you put on there, the middle hole is going to be at the number 26. And there you go. That's how easy it is to make. And that's how well you can do it with the measuring belt. So, all that being said, and all that measuring coming into play, now we're going to talk about the anatomy of an actual belt, and I'll put mine on later. So, I kind of need it. Anyway, this is the buckle end, okay? It's got the little fold over for the buckle. This is called a keeper, Okay, just about every belt has one, and I mean, normal, holding up your pants belts, they need one. All right. I make my belts with Chicago screws. I'm not a big fan of snaps, so I like Chicago screws to make mine. And then the other end over here is called the billet end. Generally speaking, the middle hole on the billet end is 5 to 6 inches from the end of the belt. Okay? Then that allows that if you're, say, using this last hole here, that the end of it will still reach your keeper. All right, but yet when you're using that last hole, you don't have 6 inches of end past your keeper. And also, when you gird it up as tight as it goes, again, the end of this belt is not uncontrollably beyond your keeper. I mean, everybody remembers the 90s when we all had a belt that was 400 sizes too big, and it was really cool that this thing hung down to like your knees. The 90s are over. Jinko jeans are out. We don't have them anymore. So anyway, or maybe they're still around. I don't wear them. All right. So how I measure my belts. Again, I start with the buckle end. And, because I've got me a strap here. Most of my straps are about 70 to 80 inches long in the beginning. And to measure my belt and mark my belts, I will take something like this template here. You don't have to have a fancy template. I mean, you can use a pair of wing dividers and you can find the center of the belt using your wing dividers. For anybody that doesn't know how to do that, you just kind of open them up to where you think the middle is, and you run them down one side and making a very light mark on your belt. Then you run them down the other side, making a very light mark on your belt. And if when those two marks line up, that's the center of your belt. Okay, so that's how you figure out where the middle is for all your holes and things like that. You have to make that line very light though, because otherwise it'll be seen in your finished project. And if you make it too heavy, it'll even catch stain and antique and stuff like that in it, and it'll be accentuated in your finished product. So anyway, here we have our belt templates. One end of it has an English point, and the other end of it has a round point. Again, I'm a huge fan of the round point. All right, and all I'm going to do is I'm going to take the round point and I'm just going to kind of draw it on there. And then I'm going to take my stylus and I'm just going to mark each of the 4 holes that are in this. These are my Chicago screw holes, or button holes if you like buttons instead. And then I'm going to just kind of trace out my oblong punch. Some people do not have an oblong punch, and I fully understand. And you know what? As a matter of fact, I'll even show you how to deal with that, because I understand not everybody has this fancy oblong punch. So here's the gangster oblong punch. This is how I did it for years when I didn't have a set of oblong punches or I didn't have the right size. You go to one end, you punch your hole. Go to the other end, you punch your hole. Then you go back with a knife and you cut out the spaces in between your holes carefully. Okay, and then you want to start at one end and work your way toward the other hole, but you don't want to go all the way, because as soon as you hit that other hole, it's going to drag across and then it's going to cut your belt on the opposite end of the hole. And you don't want that. That's not professional. So I'll do it to almost the end there. I'm doing it very lightly and making multiple passes so I don't go crazy here. And because I need to hone up my nip shield here. Now, I will say this: if you're going to skive the end of your belt down, you should do that before you do all this. I personally do not skive the ends. What I do is I make my liner stop short, and that way the fold over is thinner than the rest of the main of the body of the belt. I'll show you all that in a minute when we talk about actual construction. So now I'm going to go back from the other end of the hole and pull back towards where I've already cut and get that cut finalized there. Feels like it's good. All right, so there you go. I have cut out a slot. Now I do need to clean it up some. You can still see where it was 2 individual holes punched. You can clean it up with a number of things. I can take a scalpel in there and just ream it out a little bit more, or I can take my my edger and go around the outside edge of it. I mean, there's 1,000 ways you can clean that up and make it look better. So yeah. Now again, the other way to do what we just did is to take an oblong punch and a heavy maul. Oops. And go to town on it. So obviously that's an easier way. It does have a cleaner hole, blah, 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 blah. But I get it. These are anywhere from $40 to $60 a piece, depending on the size of them. And not everybody either could afford it or wants to afford it. I get it. I didn't have a set for years. So no judgment here. All right. Other than that, I'm going to go back and I'm going to punch my holes for my Chicago screws. I believe this is a 5/32 hole punch is what I use for my Chicago screws. I'm not really sure because the numbers wore off years ago. All right, now I start at this end and start and then the half round cut, okay? There's a couple of different ways to do a half round cut. I have a punch for it, so there it goes. But a lot of people I've seen, when they go to do a half round cut, they'll cut straight, then straight, then straight, then straight, then straight, and then just kind of round that off. And it's a really good way to do it. I've done it many times when I'm too lazy to stand up, walk 9 feet that way, and grab a half round punch. All right, so now we're going to measure this belt. And let's say, we're 19 inches to the other end. I mean, that's very, very unlikely unless this is a small child's belt, in which case it would not be 1.5 inches thick or 1.5 inches wide. But I just have a little practice strap that was a cutoff here. So I don't even know if it is 19. Yeah. So 19 inches. I better back it up. Let's say 15 inches. All right. So from my fold over here to 15 inches, and I'm just going to mark it right there. I'm measuring it on this this graph that I have underneath my cutting board, is right there. So if that's the measurement of the new belt, that needs to be where the center hole is on the new belt. Okay, that way they've got some fat and skinny room, some winter summer room, whatever you want to call it. Your goal is to have them wearing it in that middle hole the day they pick it up. That way, again, no matter the season, no matter the what, they've got that belt for a little bit. So we're going to take the other belt-in template that we have. And this one has 6 holes in it. A lot of my belts, if I'm making them for me, I only put 5 holes in it just because I know, how my size is going to be. But this one has 6 in it, and they are 1 inch apart from each other. So there's 6 inches of fluctuation. All right. Now, with that being said, since there's not technically a center hole, I'm going to put that area in between the 3rd and the 4th hole on here. Okay, so I'm going to mark my holes here, and again, you can do the same thing with the wing dividers and find your center line and then go down it and mark, every inch, every 3/4 of an inch. People do it, differently. These are every 1 inch. Okay, so I've got 6 holes marked out, and again, I'm going to go back with my hole punch. And your hole punch, people have asked me what size I use. Usually I'll use this 5/32, but it also depends. If they have a trophy buckle with that little hook on the back, I might use a smaller one. If they have a huge bar buckle that they want on it, then I'll use a bigger one. It just depends on the belt. I need to buff this thing up. It doesn't come out as easily as it used to. All right, so what we talked about a while ago, though, is that the tip of my belt is going to be 5 inches from the center hole of the belt. Okay. Now, since this one has 6, I'm actually going to go to that closest to the tip of the belt, and I'll measure my 5 inches from there. Okay. So again, I'm going to measure it on my little graph here. I'm going to put it down right there, and that's where I'm going to use my round punch and get the other end of my belt. There we go. Okay. So now we have the basic anatomy of the belt. I realize it's much more like a small dog collar, which is fine, whatever. We're just making a sample here because, again, I have my actual belt that I'm going to sew my liner to here and to complete the project. So the next thing I would do to this is glue my liner to it. All right. Normally, again, my belts, my target weight for a belt is 12, 13 ounces. If it needs to be a little bit heavier, then hey, I go a little bit heavier. But that's what my personal belts. I carry a decent sized firearm every day, so I need my belts to have some bulk to them, and I don't want that thing sagging. So that's my target goal on belts is 12, 13 ounces. So people ask me all the time, well, what thickness do you do the outside and what thickness do you do the liner? And what I tell them is it doesn't matter. I've never found that it matters what the thicknesses are as long as they add up to what you want them to add up to. So if you want them to add up to 13 ounces and you're using an 8-ounce front, then you need to have a 5-ounce back. Okay. In this case, I'm using a 9-ounce front, so I need a 4-ounce liner. So I took a nice wide piece of leather and I ran it through the splitter, and it is now about 4 ounces-ish. Okay, so I'm going to have a 13-ounce belt when this is all said and done. All right. So again, like I said a while ago, I don't skive down this part of the belt for the fold over because I'm only going to line it up to where that buckle slot starts. Okay, my lining is going to stop right there. And that way, this is nice and heavy, and then this is thinner. A lot of people have asked, and yes, it is important, I will dampen that before I do my final folding over so that the leather doesn't crack or anything. You want to dampen it so that it allows it to stretch without it cracking, especially if you've dyed your belt. This is an English bridle strap. It's not near as important with it because it is very well taken care of, and it's got a lot of waxes and oils and stuff in it. As you know, it's English bridle. That's how it does it. But anyway, if I had dyed this and everything, then that would have taken a lot of the moisture out of the belt, out of the blank. And when I fold it over, it has a very, very high chance of cracking right there. So again, give it a little bit of dampness as if you were going to tool on it or something, and give it a fold, and it'll do just absolutely great for you. So the next thing I have to do is I have to glue my liner to this belt. Now, if you will notice, my liner is wider than my belt. That is on purpose. All right, see that? 1/8 of an inch on each side. The liner is 1 3/4 of an inch wide, and the belt is 1 1/2 inch wide, or the front piece of the belt. That is by design, okay? That way, when I glue this belt to this liner, I know that I can trim off the liner and it is perfectly flush with the sides of the belt. Okay, if they were both 1 1/2 inches, then I would have to deal with the problems that maybe one of them was miscut and it was a little bit more narrow than the other or something. And also when I'm laying it down, I would have to be extremely careful to keep them exactly flush with each other as I go along. I'm going to pause this because I think the heater usually screws with the sound of the video. So I'm going to pause this and wait for that thing to stop. All right, we got lucky. That didn't take very long at all. I turned the heater off and it stopped within a few seconds. So Charlie Mike, as we used to say. All right, so I'm taking my liner and I'm just going to trim off. I mean, the liner is several feet longer than my belt blank is. So I'm just going to trim off the end of it so that I'm not, don't have it hanging over the side of the bench and everything. And so I'm not wasting it by accidentally gluing too much. And then now that piece of leather can't be used for something else later. So, all right, So now all I'm going to do is I'm going to glue these together. I'm going to use some contact cement. I apologize 100%. We are currently out of contact cement. We're trying to get more in. But anyway, I'm going to use some contact cement, and I'm going to glue these two halves of the belt together. I'm going to make sure I get this stuff all over both sides. And, you know, while being careful because I don't want it to seep around to the front of the belt. This is the strap that I did in the gunslinger stitching video. So it does have the stitch on it. So yeah, I stitched it without a lining on it. And now I'm going back and putting a lining on it. And I did that by design too because I want the inside of the belt to look nice and clean. And it doesn't look as clean with all these daggum stitches on it. That plus, I was an absolute idiot when I loaded up the sewing machine. I wasn't paying attention to my spools of thread, and I had size 277 thread in my bobbin, and that's just unheard of for a class 18. Like, that is way too heavy, especially considering on the front I was using size 138, which is like half that size. So anyway, that's why the stitching does not look so pretty on the back, and it looks too heavy because it is too heavy. So I'm just making sure I'm getting it everywhere. I'm making sure where I run it off the camera over here on the sides that it's not getting glue all over something important over there. So my little workspace may look tidy in front of the camera, but I can guarantee you it is not 1 foot to the left or right of your field of view. All right, you don't need to watch me sit here and spread glue. Just know I'm going to finish doing it on this blank side, and then I'm going to do it all the way down the liner as well. And when I come back, we'll be ready to stick these two pieces together. So pausing the camera. I think. Let me get my mouse free of my glued up belt here. All right, so we put our contact cement on both sides of the belt. We waited just a couple of minutes, like 3 or 4 is all it takes for this contact cement to set up. And bear with me here, and we're going to glue it together if I can get everything out of the way. Everything else on my desk doesn't want to play along with a big long belt. All right, so when I go to glue it together, I will lay one part of it flat on my bench. Again, I'm going to stop that just short of the buckle notch there. And I'm just going to walk with my fingers the finished part of the belt down on it. All the way down. And once again, I'm going to make sure, even though that my strap or my lining piece is 1/4 of an inch wider, I'm just going to make sure that it doesn't accidentally go off to the sides of it, and I don't overrun it, because that will just make for a terrible belt, and then I won't have nice edges on my belt, and edges are important. All right. There's nothing worse, too, than getting all the way down here to the end and realizing maybe you cut your liner a little bit too short. That's not the case, of course. I'm just explaining that accidents like that do happen. They have definitely happened to me. So, all right, did all that. Now I'm going to get my squeaky toy out, and I'm going to roll down really hard on these edges here so that we get a good bond, so that when we come to doing our edges on the belt, then they're good and sealed, and we can burnish them as one. You can see gaps right there. A part of that is because that stitching's on the back of this belt, so it's not wanting to sit down flat. And so I'm just going to take my squeaky toy here and run it down the side. I've had a lot of people ask me about this, and I know I've talked about it in other videos, but this was a product I got from Tandy years ago. It's just a heavy metal roller on a stick, basically. I don't know if Tandy still sells it or not, but I do know that since then I've found out there's something called a wallpaper roller that you could get at like a Lowe's or a Home Depot, and essentially that will be the same thing. So there you go. If you're looking for something like that, that's where you can find the squeaky toy. Hopefully yours doesn't squeak, because this one gets pretty annoying if you're doing a big area and it's squeaking a lot. All right, did that side. Now I'm going to do the other side and the very tip. The tip is just as important as the rest of it. Maybe even more important. All right. Now I am going to use a sewing machine to assemble this belt. And I'm going to go all the way around the belt. I'm going to start back here so that my beginning and end of my stitch is on the fold over where no one will ever see it. And I'm just going to go all the way around this monstrosity of a belt if I have enough thread. And then I will stop right back at the same spot that I started. I'm not going to do it on video because it's just me running a sewing machine. I'm not going to hand sew it. It's a big belt because it's for me. So anyway, so I'm going to pause the video. When I come back, it will have a stitch line all the way around the edge, approximately 1/8 of an inch from the edge. All right. So that looks way nicer now that it has that border stitch all the way around it. And again, I started and stopped my stitch right here. You can actually see it right about there. And so I started it, went all the way around the belt, back again, and to there again. Now I'm going to trim off my liner. Okay. I'm going to use one of my little pattern trim knives here, because it will give me a nice flat, since one side of it's nice and flat, it'll go right up against that belt and trim that liner off. Yar, if I can control my hands today. I need a new cutting board. This daggum cutting board's pretty much mush underneath the belt. So anyway, that's what I'm going to do, is I'm going to trim that sucker off all the way around, and then we're going to work on some edges. So I'm going to pause this because, again, you shouldn't have to sit here and watch me do this for the next 15 minutes, and we'll be back soon. All right, went ahead and trimmed all that off, and then I also went and I went and sanded down the edges just a tiny bit, because I wanted to get any glue that might be on it off. So I sanded down the edges a little bit. Now it's time to use our edger, and we will get that done. This is a Ron's Tools number 3 round edger. Since this belt's kind of heavy, I'm using a number 3. A lot of the time I'll use a number 2, but on my heavy belts, number 3. No, go easy on it over here where it's only one layer, because that number 3 will sure take off some thickness real quick. I can't stress enough the importance of good quality edgers. Barry King makes some pretty dang good ones, but I really like the Ron's ones a little bit more. I'm not saying you shouldn't buy Barry's by any means. I had them for years and really liked them, and I'm seriously considering adding them to our store. But I really like the Ron's. I like how they're designed. I seem to be able to hold them a little bit easier when and get the correct angle with them a little bit easier. They ride really flat down against the leather compared to other brands and stuff, and I like that. All right, we'll turn it over and do the back side. All right. I am not going to dye and burnish the edges on the video here. Anybody that's watched any of my videos has seen me dye and burnish 100 times. I will use just regular dye on the edge, and then I'll burnish it using Ron's Edge Rub. And yeah, that'll be that. I'm just not going to do it on the video because it's late, and I'm excited about what Janie's cooking for dinner tonight, and we still need to make us a keeper. So I am going to pause the video so I can go find me some leather to make the keeper out of right quick. All right, so what I did is I just found the other end of my strap that I made the belt out of. I cut a little piece off and sent it through the splitter so that it's about 3 ounces or so. I'm going to use a Montana edger to edge down. Oh, first, I'm sorry. I need to cut it to the right width. Here's one of my rulers. So again, I'm going to use my little ruler that has the grid on it so that I can kind of measure out this thing. I like to make them about 3/8 to a 1/2 inch thick or wide as it may be. I like them to have a little bit of body and volume to them. I don't like them to be really thin. This is not a dress belt by any means. All right. So there we go. I've got my little strip of leather here. It is right at a 1/2 inch. I'm going to take a Montana Edger number 1, I believe, and just barely skim the sides of it here. If I can even do that. This leather's pretty pliable. There we go. Spin it around, do it again. Turn it over, do it again. And I am going to go ahead and burnish this little doohickey because I need to before I finish making it. So. Okay, grab some dye here. I got a random bottle of Angelus Brown here. This is medium brown, but it doesn't really matter because when you burnish over it, it all turns into dark brown. Colors will stay colors, but brown will turn into dark brown, period. And that's what I want on the edges of the belt as well, as kind of a darker brown. Give it a nice little accent. Take my dauber and just barely go along the edge here to take out any light spots. It's really hard to burnish these really, really thin pieces. You've got to be very gentle with them because otherwise you're just going to have them fold over in your hand. That's not the point. All right, so there we go. Find my Ron's Edge Rub. There it is. A little piece of canvas here. All right. Rub a tiny bit of this on here and then just lightly burnish it with the canvas. All I'm trying to do is make it look smooth. And I sure wish I had a cleaner piece of canvas. This one's pretty wore out. Okay. Again, I'm just very, very lightly burnishing it because if I go too crazy on it, it'll just fold up in my hands. So I'm just trying to take the rough spots out of it and make it look nice and smooth. All right. So, how do I measure how long the keeper needs to be? I put it around the belt. The keeper will be in between these layers right here. Okay, the keeper will come out in between these layers, go up and over, and then back under right there. So it needs to go across this many layers of leather. Okay, technically it's 4 layers of leather, but it's only 2 layers of belt. So what I do is I'm going to wrap it around it here, and I'm just going to pull it barely snug. I'm not pulling it tight. I'm just barely pulling it snug, wrapping it over itself there. And I'm going to use my thumbnail, and I'm going to mark it in 2 places. Okay, I'm going to mark it where the under piece lays under this one right here, under the over piece, and then I'm just going to mark it over about 3/4 of an inch across where I can cut the top piece. All right, so I've got 2 marks there. Carefully lay this belt down. I almost hit the mouse, and who knows, I might have stopped or deleted the video, and that would have been terrible. There are a lot of different ways to do excuse me. There are a lot of different ways to join this thing over. For years, I just did the simplest method I could, which is I folded it over. I have a very heavy-duty stapler. I'd put a couple of staples in there, and I would press the staples down with some pliers to make sure they were nice and flush. I have gone and taken my skiving knife and skived down both ends of it, and then overlapped them over each other and glued them down. I've done a combination of the 2. And the good news is, out of all the belts I've made over the years, not a single person has ever called me and said that the keeper came undone. So what we will do is we're going to just skive down a little bit, just so there's not so much bulkiness. And we'll glue it down, and we'll go ahead and throw a couple of staples in it for good measure. And that should get this bad boy taken care of. So I'm going to lightly skive. Without skiving into my mat too much. All right. And I'm just going to glue those 2 pieces together. And then again, I'm going to, let me check, I'm going to check for fit, make sure I didn't either stretch it out or cut it too short all of a sudden. I may have cut a little bit of it off, or I know I cut a little bit of it off when I skived it, so I'll just check it for fit again. And I'll mark my my overlap point again just to make sure. Marking it with my thumbnail there, and no problem. I'm going to glue these together now right quick. See, I'm already wearing my new belt. Get a little dab of glue on both sides of that union there. And by the time I walk over there and grab my stapler and come back, this thing will be ready to glue. All right. I'm going to fold it over itself, paying attention to my little marked line that I just made. And I'm going to go ahead and put a couple of staples in it. And like I said, I'm going to take some pliers because those staples are kind of bulky. I'm going to take some pliers and I'm going to squeeze them down really good. I happen to have a pair of pliers sitting right here from who knows what I was doing earlier. And I'll just take them and squeeze them down good and flat so that it doesn't create bulk inside the belt. Alrighty. So now I'll take this. Once the belt is burnished, I'll take it and put it on there. I'm going to punch out my 2 holes like I showed you earlier, and I'll punch out the 2 holes on the back side there. I will put my Chicago screws in. I don't have a buckle for this just yet, so I'm going to leave the buckle out for now. Put my Chicago screws in right there. And then I'm going to come down here and I'm going to punch these holes just like I showed you on the little sample piece earlier. And voila, I will have a new belt. This one will probably end up being a store display, but that's okay. There's still a new belt. So anyway, I hope that anybody that's been wanting to make belts, that maybe this helps you with some of the measurements and the layout and things like that. So I try to help as much as I can there. Anyway. Again, I'm Aaron Heiser of Maker's Leather Supply, and thank you so much for watching. Have a great night.